Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Developing Efficient Processes with Ideate Software and Gautam Shenoy from Steinberg Hart. My name is Richard Taylor with Ideate Software, and thanks for joining us today. So I am just absolutely thrilled and honored to present Gautam Shenoy from
Thank you,
Steinberg
Richard.
Hart this morning, and I'm going to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. So here is our slide talking about the different products that we have from Ideate. So feel free to go ahead and give everyone an overview per year.
Well, Ideate Software creates 5 add-on solutions to Revit. And you see there, our latest is Ideate Style Manager, but we have Ideate Explorer, BIM Link, Ideate Sticky, and Ideate Apps. So I'll start there in the center. Ideate BIM Link allows you to extract information from the Revit model, all the parameter information and parameter data, send it to Excel, and review or make changes in Excel, and then import those changes back into the model for update. So you're using Excel as your basically engine to make vast amounts of data changes, and it's very efficient and easy. Ideate Sticky on the upper right there also uses Excel, but what it does is instead of sort of the data or the parameter information, it's if you have, let's say, general notes or manufacturing data that you would like to include in your Revit project, it's a way for you to live link an Excel spreadsheet into the project and keep that up to date. So sort of a visual representation of the Excel data in Revit. And then I'm going to switch over to the lower left there. Ideate Explorer is our model browser. It allows you to understand every element in the project. The project browser shows you a lot of things that could potentially be in your project. They're in your, let's say you load 100 families. That doesn't necessarily mean that all 100 families are used in your model. So the Ideate Explorer is a model browser that shows you a snapshot or a representation of the entire elements of your model. We're also including our warnings manager that allows you to effectively review and fix warnings sort of interactively in the dialogue. And then I'm going to switch up to the upper left. Ideate Style Manager is our newest release that allows you to understand like all these, we call them styles, but they're really object styles, line styles, patterns, materials, even view filters that may have been, for instance, loaded into your project from content that you receive. And then now all of a sudden you have a lot of non-standard styles that are kind of clogging up your project. So this allows you to review, sort of forensically analyze, are they being used, where are they being used, and then allows you to merge and clean up those styles very easily so that you're matching and adhering to your standards. And then switching down to the lower right, the last tool to talk about is Ideate Apps, which is a collection of 9 tools. They're productivity tools for all Revit users, so that allowing you to, let's say, renumber or allowing you to understand why something doesn't display in a particular view with our Ideate X-ray. So I know that Gautam has quite a slide on Ideate Apps and a lot of information on that today, so I won't talk too much about that, but again, it's productivity tools for all Revit users. So that's a quick snapshot of the offerings from Ideate Software, and I'll switch it back to you, Gautam.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy Wednesday mornings to sit in here with us and listen to some of the ideas I've developed over the period of time in sort of finding the best case scenario and workflow opportunities to leverage data that we depend on and synthesize on a regular basis. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you to Ideate and the Ideate team for allowing me to have some time with their webinar series and speak with everyone and share some of these thoughts and such. I still remember I've been using Ideate products for almost over 10 years now, and I remember sitting in a conference room back in 2009 with Sash and Craig and talking about Explorer and BIM Link. So look how far along we've come, right? Isn't that amazing? So What are we talking about today? I'll give you an overview of what we do at Steinberg Hart. Then we will look at a couple of lists of questions that you typically need to pose when you're working towards either winning a project or on the path to procurement. I will share a master map that tells you how design technology connects and all this data that we typically leverage is sort of interconnected and how Ideate apps fall into play. We'll have a short discussion about the difference between using Dynamo, which is a great product as well, but how Ideate becomes sort of an easier and a much more intuitive solution compared to that. We will discuss a few slides that talk about project delivery methods, and I know that some of the users that may be on this conversation have seen these slides before, but notwithstanding, I wanted to give you a heads up so that you know the flow of data through all the different delivery systems. We'll talk a little more about the timelines for those. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to 2 or 3 slides to talk about how to measure, return of investment or return on investment, sorry, on your team, so that when you have to talk to your leadership about investing in these products, how can you present your case and make an effective, judgment call. I'll show you a couple of examples we use here at Steinberg Hart as well, and then we sort of do a summary. So I am currently working at Steinberg Hart. I have been with this company for almost 3.5 years now. I love working here. The one thing that really stands out to me is the entrepreneurial spirit of how we take initiatives without even going and asking questions before we know that we absolutely cannot find a solution. It's sort of an impetus and an expectancy on behalf of all of us, as well as the leadership, to find the answers and find problems ahead of time, so you can find the solutions and go ahead and share that with the group. So there's this sense of there's no hierarchy. We are very horizontally driven. There's no sort of tiering system, and I think that's something that really stands out to me. We have 4 offices across California and 1 in Shanghai. We're pretty much located in the metros in California. And oh, by the way, that's me sitting there wearing an old pair of Converse shoes. We have over 155 employees, 55 plus registered architects. We are predominantly a design studio, and we take pride in saying so. The market sectors we service vary from mixed use, education, hospitality, commercial, civic, residential, and so forth. There are some examples I'll show you very quickly. That slide picture on the top left is from Suffolk's office in San Francisco. We do some great interior work as well. From our mixed use perspective, we have a lot of great designs that are developed in Los Angeles as well as San Jose. That one's on Wilshire. This one's Miro in San Jose, and that's coming up in Los Angeles as well. We have a lot of great hotels that we've worked on, and one of the main ones that we're really taking pride on is the Morrison Hotel. If you listen to the Doors and if you've seen the album cover of Morrison Hotel, that's where it was exactly shot. So how about that, right? And then a couple of residential examples as well. Who am I? I am Gautam. I have been with Steinberg, like I said, for Steinberg Hart for about 3.5 years. I love BIM. I got into the whole idea of BIM VDC about 15 years ago, and I've never looked back since. It's really wonderful to know that the industry has completely embraced this. And one of the opportunities that I always have is to speak at conferences, and I love doing that because it helps me learn from others as well as spread some of the ideas that we've come along. I was originally born and raised in Mumbai. I moved here about 18 years ago. I came here to go to USC, fight on, graduated with a master's in building science. And then I've had the opportunity of working on some wonderful projects where I was able to sink my teeth in, understand building and design technology as well as BIM, for that matter. So that includes the Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, the San Diego terminal expansion for the international airport, as well as the north and south concourses at LAX. All right. And one more thing, I also speak at a lot of Bluebeam as well as other expos, and I'm hoping we can connect again and again and share knowledge. So let's start from the top down, right? Asking the right questions. That's my first slide. So when you procure a project, there are several questions you need to ask and be aware of. What is the delivery system you engaged? Because that's how data flows not only between your team, but also the design and the construction teams. What are the platforms that your users are leveraging? because all that nowadays the data that we deal with is not just geometric like it was 10 years ago. There's so much more information that's coming in form of metadata. So you want to be able to clearly clarify with your teams all the platforms you're utilizing. What is the scope of your project? Are you just the design architect, and is there another architect of record? Are you just the single team, and how are you going to share this information with everybody else? How are you intending to tell the story of your project? So cartooning becomes a very important aspect. And as you already know, Ideate apps like BIM Link, as well as the Ideate app Sheet Manager and Clone, also become really handy in utilizing these efficient processes. What are the crucial dates that you're meeting to provide your documentation, the benchmarks that go with your major submissions, as well as anything related to regulatory agencies? Are you devising any project parameters based on that you're going to share with your consultants? All that becomes a part of the leveraging system so that you know how the data flows. Furthermore, do you have any people on the team that may not be Revit users? And that's very much the case when you're dealing with civil, because they may be using Civil 3D, landscape architects may be using AutoCAD. So how do you get their data from them and plug that into your data set, right? Those are the questions you need to find out. Then you take a step into your project delivery system, right? From there, you go into the actual project. What data are you capturing at SDs? For permitting processes, if it's, if you're going to the city, what all do you need? What are you going to be capturing for a GMP? If that's a guaranteed maximum price set, it's a sort of a contractual terminology. If you're not aware, that is helpful in understanding what the maximum price would be for your project, and furthermore allow you the possibility of either designing more or stopping at some point. What is the data you're providing at CDs? Has anything changed so far, and how are you leveraging all that information for construction administration? And furthermore, if you're going into operations, what is that data that you'll be taking from the top all the way through the timeline to the end, right? Then we talk a little more about coordination related information. When you as architects, if you're an architect, you'll know that you're typically the custodian of all the sheets and all the data that comes from your consultant. So how are you going to organize that? I bet many of you are always having the issue of getting last minute requests from your team members, because they are also in flux when it comes to their design ideas. So how do you make sure all that information gets correctly timelined so that when you're at the tail end of a deadline, you have this tabulated, ready to go and submitted? What are the crucial dates? The permitting process, what are the coordination benchmarks you need to establish between your teams? Any intermediate dates for reviewing your documents? Major benchmarks, and if there are any changes that you did not anticipate, how are you, planning for that? Why does this all matter? Because it all comes down to data. Aside from the drawing information, the data that's in your drawings, whether it's a model that's becoming a deliverable or a set of contract documents like sheets and specifications, all of them are interconnected. So how do you establish that connection? So here's a map that I put together a few months ago, explaining the understanding of how the data needs to flow. Because not only does this allow me to understand the idea of delivery, it helps me tie in design technology and products such as Ideate Software, as well as other platforms that I would typically use, and understand how they impact the final phases, which is construction and operations. So what I typically do is help my team members start from the top down here, project delivery, which we just discussed, then understanding design technology, what are the different aspects of it, what's the flow between all of this, and then finally, how does this inform construction and operations, right? So what I would recommend is you do a sort of an overall survey of all the different etymologies, as well as the systems that you typically employ within your office or within your firm, and put a label as well as a map and a timeline to it, because that really helps you not only onboard your team members, but also helps you refine any processes. A good example for us is at Steinberg Hart. We've always been using Ideate BIM Link to generate sheets, but then because of Ideate apps, there are these 3 or 4 different products within the Ideate apps stream that allow us to clone sheets, to align them correctly, and make sure that all that information is collated in the right sequence. So the limitation that we had with BIMLink has been sort of compensated by Ideate apps. So how do you use these in sync? Those are the things that you can establish through such a timeline. So that's the question I'm asking you here. How well are you acquainted with the timeline of your project? As BIM managers, coordinators, and directors, I think it's very important for us to not only look at the weeds, but also have a general overview. And one thing that I forgot to mention when I had this when this conversation begun was to tell you that, we've had plenty of great webinars. Ideate has an incredible resource system on their website for all the videos that go into the details and the weeds about how to use the products. But what I want to do is I want to share an overall, sky level view of sorts to help you understand how to leverage all your data, right? So that was a little sort of retroactive in that. So now within the timeline, for instance, when you start a project, what are you leveraging? You have an entitlement set. You need to go to the city, make sure that your plan checking process gets through and your drawing set gets approved. Many a times your designers will be doing their design work in other platforms that are not Revit based, right? So, when they're doing calculations, when they're doing schemes, and they want to provide that data to you, how would you take all that information and put it in a drawing set that is predominantly being developed in Revit? So you have to consider interoperability. And I think Ideate software provides wonderful solutions to sort of bridge that gap. My big question that I always ask my team members is, from an interoperability standpoint, how are we going to leverage all this information, right? So there may be a possibility where a project manager is very quickly devising areas, zoning related information in Excel. How would you take that and place it onto a sheet that's being developed in Revit? And you know the answer. And if you don't, by all means, look at Ideate software and you'll know the answer in a few minutes, right? Sticky is a great example. Code-related notes, unit counts, and all these things for residential projects, for instance, come in handy when a majority of the designs are still on the sketch table, so to speak, but not completely come to fruition in a delivery platform such as Revit or AutoCAD. But typically, most offices, as you can tell, use Revit. So bridging that gap is important, and Ideate provides all the possible opportunities for you to do that. When you step into schematic, there's a possibility that you hybridize this system and go through the motions of taking some data from other platforms and then leverage what's available to you in Revit. Ideate plays a strong role in that as well. A lot of the platforms that they provide help you to take information from BIMlink and get that into your code-related tabulations and so forth. When you go into design development, by this time, I'm hoping your entire project is in Revit, and that's when you see, when you see Ideate apps and Ideate software going full stream ahead for all the possible data exchange and flow that you're utilizing. And then in construction documents and CA, you basically take all that information and adjust it accordingly. So I think if you understand that and if you're able to sort of map out all this information ahead of time, you can clearly plug and understand where this occurs. So this map tells you that exactly. So what I've done is from the top down in the proposal stage, what am I doing? What is my team doing? Form finding, programming. What are we using for that? Right? When we go into early concept, you're formulating areas, you're doing form finding, you're doing programming. Within that, you have Excel related data that you may be getting from your project managers and designers. You may have some things that geometrically are coming from another platform such as Rhino or SketchUp that you need to leverage in your data set. But because of our BIM backgrounds, we always are sort of the custodians of a centralized data system. A common data environment such as BIM 360 is becoming more and more prevalent today. And the beauty of it is, even though you don't have 360, you have a program such as Revit, where you can take all this information, use Ideate software to bridge that gap and take the next step. So all the different parts and pieces that I showed you in the back slide get thrown into a timeline and help you understand, as well as your team, how they come into play, where they need to be plugged in, and therefore establish a sort of a workflow for your project delivery. Okay, so the next part starts about here. I have a lot of users that I've come across that are very, very proficient in Dynamo, but I have personally also struggled with learning it, and it's something that I'm trying to best myself. And I came across this wonderful article on Thinkful that sort of explained the process of learning when it comes to coding, right? There are some of us that are naturally inclined to become excellent coders, but some of us, such as myself, that take a little extra time than usual to understand coding and sort of go through the motions. Believe me when I say that my ability to do flow charts and mind maps is phenomenal, right? We all are sort of inclined to do that, but learning the syntax, being able to learn to leverage all that syntax correctly is a time-consuming, process. In the meantime, the McLeamy curve is demanding more and more from you at the front end. How do you leverage this? So when I juxtapose and superimpose these together, you know that while your users are sort of learning the ropes, because there are some offices that are fully utilizing these technologies, while majority of us are still learning to leverage that. In the meantime, there's already this stream of applications through Ideate that allows you to take all this data and make sure that it's leveraged correctly. So why not take your Dynamo skills and utilize it for something else, while you can have a systematic approach to leveraging your data based on Ideate apps, right? So that's that. And very quickly to let you know, the other thing that's becoming an industry trend is the learning of Python. I came across this beautiful poem by Tim Peters, and I really love the two lines. It goes, if the implementation is hard to explain, it's a bad idea. If the implementation is easy to explain, it may be a good idea. Meanwhile, your project timelines are going further, right? So why not make use of what you have, and how about talking to Ideate and giving them ideas on how they can add more value to our as well as their streams. Next, project delivery. I will go very quickly through some of the systems that we typically engage on a daily basis. And if you have seen these slides before, maybe at some of my other presentations, I want to let you know that, this is something that I am trying to teach everyone in the industry. It's a huge undertaking to understand this, especially, when you are a new user or someone that is relatively inexperienced in the field. I choose to do that because whether the timeline affects you or not, the flow of data that we typically engage on a daily basis has different conduits and different paths. So in a typical old school system like design bid build, you as the designer may have data that's coming from your consultants, and then the general contractor may have data that's coming in from their trades, but all that gets filtered through the owner. When you have multi-prime, the owner becomes the conduit for all this data that's coming between the designer as well as other consultants or trades. So in a multi-prime scenario, know that the term prime means it's the primary contract that's administered between the owner and the participants. So as you can tell, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 contracts that are being administered by the owner across the board. So can you see the sort of traffic jam, for the lack of a better term, between the data flow? Next, you have construction manager at risk, where there may be 2 CMs, one that arrives at a GMP while the other takes the GMP and constructs it. And finally, design build, which is one of my favorite methodologies, simply because it compels everyone to be at the same table, break bread, and share information. This is where the highest amount of data flow as well as interoperability and integration occurs, right? So there are 2 things you need to understand from an implementation standpoint. You have coordination, you have collaboration, and then you have integration. I prefer to use the term integration. And then you have finally the final and the most, the best case scenario example of integrated project delivery, right? Where everybody starts off at the same time and data is becoming more and more accessible to everyone. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because all these different intermediate locations where the benchmarks occur between the different phases of your design and delivery, this data needs to have ease of flow. And that's where Ideate Software becomes the most powerful solution. Across platforms, across consultants, across states, state lines, you name it, right? That's one of the reasons why I think it's a great idea to have an understanding of the timeline. Okay, let's move on to the next item. So one of the things that I have come across in my own experience is being able to provide a strong case for my users, for my teams, and explain to leadership that we need to make an investment in providing more solutions. And I can't think of a better example than what I did for Ideate Apps. So when Ideate Apps came out, I wanted to make sure that our leadership was able to get all the seats for all the users, about 100 seats, which is quite a daunting endeavor. But that investment that you make in that comes in handy in the long run. So how do you explain this, right? So what I did was I came up with this matrix where I said I broke down each of the apps and explained what the tasks performed are by those apps, correct? Then the next column tells you that if someone was to do this task manually, how much time would it take? So for instance, if you're creating views, 20 to 40 hours. If you are doing a spell check, you have to go through it manually through Revit and do your checks and balances to that. And that too, it's limited to the parametric data that's in the file, right? So on and so forth. So if you are using Ideate Apps for each of those utilities within the apps, how much time would that take you? So there's a significant amount of time that is saved between the different processes. And then I went on to explain what is the significance of that and who is the user. Next, what I did was I put dollar amounts associated with them to it. And I said for every phase, if we don't use this app, we lose maybe a minimum of $4,000, $9,000, which adds up to about $20,000. I'm sorry. I've had too much coffee this morning, so I'm like really excited. Which adds up to almost like $20,000 for one project. And if you have 10 projects, that's a lot of money, right? So why not bring in these apps, bring in the software solutions, train our staff, and go through the motions of integrating it into the process. And it became a successful venture. So I've now been able to sort of go and talk to my leadership with these elaborate Excel files and charts, explain to them my case, and so on and so forth, right? So how does Steinberg Hart use Ideate Apps, right? So here's what a couple of examples that I want to give you. When it comes to some of the products that we use, and I'm sorry, I keep saying apps, but I meant to say Ideate Software products, right? Ideate BIM Link, for instance, we use it for sheet indexes. We create sheets. Of course, you all know that you can use it for schedules. If you have a hardware consultant that's not using Revit, for instance, you can have them become more and more proficient by providing you the data through Excel, and you simply integrate that back into your door schedule. Areas, occupancies, and any hyper calculations that you need to do through a schedule based on the parametric data is also available through BIMLink. For Ideate Explorer, what we do is we find content. So as Richard had explained in one of the early slides, it essentially operates like Windows Explorer for you, and it allows you to sort of go through the entire model directory and database and find items that may not be seen on a particular view and so forth. And the best part about that is you can tie that up with the inbuilt filters in Revit and use that sort of combination to look for data or look for items. Warning resolution is a really powerful tool that's available through Explorer that we use. So what we do is within every project, we have a schedule where on a Friday morning or maybe afternoon, we will spend an hour where every user puts his or her pencils down, goes through the warnings, resolves them, and keeps a good tab on all the information that's getting fed into the project. Mainly when you are on a deadline, you will agree with me that there are so many possibilities that you can generate errors, and that's why having a weekly check of warnings through Ideate Explorer comes in really handy to perform maintenance on your model and keep it healthy. Ideate Sticky. I have come across many cases where we have senior technical directors across our practice that don't want to open up Revit, but have valuable information that they can provide you. So instead of going back and changing that in Revit every time or training them, if you allow them to use Excel, part that information into Excel, and then simply update it in your Revit database, that's perfect because they are able to do the tasks rather than worry about the learning curves. A majority of times we utilize that for specifications or code-related data, computations for design and so forth. I have seen more of use of Ideate Sticky in our entitlement packages because there is so much data that's flowing between platforms, as I explained in some of the earlier slides. It's so much more easier to take it into Sticky, place it onto a sheet, develop your set, provide it, get a permit, and then start back in Revit and utilize some of the other solid Ideate software that you are used to using on a regular basis. For apps, a lot of my users are still starting to get more and more acquainted with it. And the majority of the times we use it for cloning, we use it for sorting views, we use the spell check, and every now and then there'll be content that's missing in a view, so we'll use X-ray and quick select. I have to admit that Ideate Style Manager is something we are still learning. So aside from a few cleanups, we haven't used it as much. And I know, for instance, from last two webinars that we had with Brian Mackey and Pay It, where Kara and Dan gave a few examples of how they utilize it as well. So, by all means, go back to the webinars. And furthermore, there are some great videos on how to use Style Manager on our Ideate's website as well. And I need to do that too with my users, right? So we talked about that. This is another set of examples that I'm going to go through. So here's an example, right? So let me go back to our intranet. So within the Steinberg Hart realm, we have an intranet where we provide a lot of the information as well as forums for all our users to leverage data and information. So in my section, which is design technology, we have BIM apps, and within that, we have a section for Revit where we talk about, all the different things that you need to keep in mind, the project parameters you need to set up, how you set up views, sheets, and so forth. So one of the things that we always talk about are project parameters. Why is that? Because one of the big utilizations for parameters is not only for indexing your sheets, but also for providing benchmarks when you are providing revisions, updates, and so forth. And I think BIMLink has been phenomenally instrumental in helping us, leverage that. So what we do is we build project parameters like so, and then we create what is called as, one second, let me show you guys very quickly, a project parameter Revit file, right? So it essentially looks like this. It's a simple 400 to 500 kilobyte file that contains all the data benchmarks. And know that obviously you don't know all the benchmarks ahead of time, but the beauty of it is you can add all these parameters using manage project parameters, supply these on a regular basis, on a need to know basis, and send it to your consultants. And Revit updates that automatically, and by no means does it duplicate a particular set of project parameters. And that allows you to put all the dots for your sheet indexes, right? But the beauty of it, how that gets utilized is we bring all that information into Excel through BIMLink, update all the dots, etc. And furthermore, one of the big things in an index is sorting. We do a lot of residential and higher education work, which means there's a possibility of basements occurring. So how do we take all that information that's at the basement and is not alphanumerically set up? So you want the basement floor plans to show up first, and then you want the regular floor plans to show up after. How do you sort that? You use sheet sort order, right? You use a sort of an override, and then you have data that needs to be provided for sorting it based on disciplines, volumes, and so forth. And BIMLink is so much more easier to use. All we do is we provide this information via a project parameters file to our consultants that are using Revit. And if you're not using Revit, we simply send you the Excel file. So what they do is they fill out this field, which are the sheet number and the name. They also, we exclusively instruct them to fill out sheet sort orders, discipline orders, and then fill out the dates as well as the dots associated with that. What we do is we bring that Excel file back into BIMLink and simply update it, and our sheet indexes are good to go. So that's what I'm explaining over here through this particular example. Now, if you have a consultant that doesn't know what to do with the project parameter file you sent them, simply tell them to go pick the insert from file, insert views from file, and a schedule essentially is a view. But the beauty of it is, as you already know, when you bring in a view or a schedule, the project parameters associated with it also get pulled into your project. So all these different benchmarks that you have created using Revit get pulled in. So that's for a Revit-based project. And if it's not, all you have to do is go back to Excel that is generated from BIMLink, send it to your consultant, get it back, and then re-upload it back into your database via BIMLink. All right. So here's the example of, that I talked about before. So one of the reasons I brought that back again is because here's how we sort of leverage the different systems across the board, across different phases, and explain to not only our teams, but also our consultants on what is utilized where. coming back to the original slide that we talked about, project delivery systems. So know that all this information that gets leveraged is important and has to be, flowing methodically through the different phases. And that's how this map works out. And that's about it. I think we're good to go. I wanted to thank you guys for your time, and I appreciate you singing me for these 30 odd minutes and listening to all these ideas. I know it's a lot of information to soak in, and if I was speaking fast, I've been accused of doing that before. I apologize. And by all means, reach out to me through LinkedIn. My LinkedIn credentials were ahead. It's GAUTMRS. And thank you again for your time.
Gautam, that was excellent. Thank you. This is Richard.
Thank you.
You did a return on investment for the Ideate apps and those 9 tools within Ideate apps. Did you do a similar return on investment for some of the other solutions like Ideate BIM Link or Ideate Sticky? I know you've been using those probably for a lot longer, so maybe that you didn't have the opportunity to do the return on investment earlier on, because that was probably before you even came to Steinberg.
Right, correct. Yes, the answer is no. I have not done it for any of the others, but I can tell you right off the top of my head, because with BIMLink, for instance, you can talk about how a simple example of door schedules come into play. If your door schedules are not set up correctly, all the information that you're putting in at the time of putting your doors in the project is barely there. So when you take it into Excel, you can update all that information. Then sheet index is another example. Materials, finishes, all these schedules that you deal with on a regular basis. You know that your users will take a certain amount of time to get that information in. So compare that against what you would typically take if you're using BIMLink, and then show that across to your leadership, and you'll know that there's a great difference between hours to versus days of the week.
Excellent. Well, I love the fact that you were talking about parameters. Actually, my colleague, Sash Kazaminajad, did a presentation just last week at the Seattle, the Built North America, which is the Building Infrastructure Lifecycle and Technology Conference that many of you on the call are familiar with. He did a presentation on We All Love Parameters, and specifically talking about all of the parameters. And I loved, one of his tips was that transferring parameters from one project to another via the schedule view, which you mentioned.
Right.
So I thought that's just perfect. And that was a really good tip.
Thank you, Richard. It comes in so much more handy, because aside from sending large size files, it's a lot more easier to get this information, especially if you're dealing with someone that's in the design build capacity and they are not yet in the process of receiving your modeling information. They can still use this, because at the end of the day, you still need the benchmarks, etc., to keep a tab on all the drawing sets. Whether you're an architect or in a design build scenario, the general contractor, who's also a part of the design build entity, becomes the custodian of all the drawings. So they want to keep a tab on the previous benchmarks versus the new. So when you send these 300-400 kilobyte files, it's so much more easier to get this information in, update the indexes, and you're done. You can get this done in a matter of 2-3 hours. Thanks to BIM Link.
That's great. That's excellent. I also love the fact when you were talking about Ideate Explorer and just warnings, and just, even divorcing it from the Ideate apps, or I should say the Ideate solutions, everyone should be fixing warnings no matter what they're using. And I love the fact that you have a weekly, dedicated time where you're actually fixing those warnings. Because that is so important. And I've done several presentations on just sort of warnings management within Revit, and how critical it is to sort of regularly fix and review those warnings that come up on our projects.
I couldn't agree more. Great. Thank you again, Richard. Thank you, Ideate.
Well, this is fantastic. So I don't see any other questions, so I think we're going to be closing down the webinar. Thanks very much for everyone and their time and attention. I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of the week.